The man I'm about to introduce is Ryan Mayfield, and he's the founder and he's a subject matter expert with Mayfield Renewables. But I just want to point out Mayfield and Ryan have been leading with education for over 25 years. So I'm sure many of you have watched Code Corner, Ask Mayfield Anything, all the trainings that they've done over the years, and I think that's a testament to Mayfield Renewables and to Ryan. So thank you, Ryan. So our last segment here is Ask Mayfield Anything panel, Commercialization of Microgrids. We have Ryan Mayfield, who founder and SMA of Mayfield Renewables. Bobby Butler, account manager of ELM Microgrid. Carolyn Moore, Energy Program Director of the Oregon Public Utility Commission, and John Miller, Development Director, Renewables of McKinstry.
Great. Thank you, Robert. Really appreciate that. That was a very nice introduction. I wasn't quite sure what to expect, so thank you for keeping it civil. We have the distinct pleasure of being the final panel, so understanding that we are what stands between you and food and drink. We will do our best to keep you entertained, and I don't know who we made mad by getting this spot. I don't know if we missed paying an invoice or something, but we'll make sure that we take care of that next year. Thank you very much, Tao Cross Consulting, helping put this together. Really pleased to be here and be part of this event and talking with all of you and having a super smart panel that can talk about commercialization of microgrids. In this segment, we're going to take a bit of a diversion, I guess you could say, where microgrids being a solution for a number of applications. We'll have John kind of talk about different applications, different use cases for microgrids specifically. Data centers being one of those, but there's quite a broad use case that you could say, or a number of use cases for these. So we're going to get into that, talking about kind of how we're going to commercialize those, how we're moving forward in that transition. Real quick, I do want to give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves, their position, their companies, and what they're doing, where they're at. So I'll quickly start. Ryan Mayfield, founder of Mayfield Renewables. And I do want to also recognize that a number of my my team members are in the audience and will be here around to help. We've been helped on the registration and just a lot of the organization. So feel free, encourage you to talk with our people as we start to do the networking. Mayfield Renewables is an engineering firm, a consulting and project engineering firm. So we do a lot of work on microgrid specific. And we've been the EOR on a number of projects. At least half of our projects now have storage, mostly microgrid type systems, and been very happy of doing that. The other part of our business is doing education. As Robert mentioned, I've been educating for a number of years, and not sure it's quite 25, but thank you for that. Education is a big part of what Mayfield does, and with that, I just need to do a little quick plug. We have a education summit that is happening up the road in this little town called Seattle in October, and would welcome folks to learn about that. We have information, be happy to tell you about that. But it's a lot about we have 3 different tracks, one of them being microgrid specific and talking about being able to apply codes and standards and things like that. So with that, I will pass it over here to Bobby. And yeah, please just go ahead and take a moment, introduce yourself, your company, and kind of what your role is.
Hi, I'm Bobby Butler. I'm with ELM Microgrid. I'm the Director of Sales at ELM. At ELM, hence our name, ELM Microgrid. That is exactly what we do. We're a battery energy storage system manufacturer in the Dallas, Texas area. We have nearly 400 sites deployed throughout the continental United States, Canada, a lot in the Caribbean and the Bahamas. And many of those are fully islanded microgrid systems, hence why we have had a lot of success in the Bahamas, in the Caribbean, where electricity is either expensive, unreliable, non-existent, or some combination of those three, we very much thrive. And we do tend to focus on quote-unquote smaller systems than maybe what else is out there. We do focus on the C&I space, hence my role on this panel. So we do focus on 100 kilowatts to about roughly 10 megawatts, and we can scale up from there.
My name is Caroline Moore. I'm the director of the energy program at the Oregon Public Utility Commission, which is the regulatory body, the state regulatory body over electric investor-owned or privately owned electric utilities. We focus more on the front of the meter than on what happens behind the meter, but our mission is to regulate utilities so that they provide safe, affordable, and reliable electric service. And we spend a lot of time worrying about, how costs are allocated across customer classes and to customers versus shareholders. And we also spend a lot of time implementing state policy. And after this session, we're going to spend a whole lot more time implementing state policy.
Hi, I'm John Miller. I work for McKinstry. We are a construction ESCO energy service company based out of Seattle. We probably have about 20 to 30 offices across the country. We've been in business since like 1960. I think we have about 3,000 employees. We work on everything in the buildings, the lights, the fire sprinklers, the plumbing, the HVAC systems, all of that types of stuff. We typically are trying to make buildings more livable and to make them more efficient, to reduce their carbon footprint. So we focus on making all of those systems that use energy more efficient. My job is distributed energy resources. I work in solar, and I work with microgrids. So I spend a lot of my time on spreadsheets with proformas and seeing where markets are that we should be working in and how projects might work there, how do we get them financed. I spend most of my time on the front end working on those issues with our sales folks.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And so as we jump into this, one of the things that we decided as we were preparing for this is defining what a microgrid is, and was recently at a microgrid-specific conference, and amazingly enough, a room full of people that were there explicitly for a microgrid didn't seem to quite have a consensus on how to really define the microgrid. The themes were there amongst everybody, and we talked about it internally. And so one of the things that we just kind of want to set the stage with is, when we say microgrid, what are we talking about? And last panel, they talked about it as well. And so for us, when we start talking about this, it's a system that has generation, loads, and the ability to connect and disconnect from the utility. So we have generation sources, we have solar, we have maybe we have wind, maybe we have fuel cells, other gas generators, some form of electrical generation. We have a way of storing that, and then we have on-site loads. And this connection and disconnection from the utility is what is a big portion of this, what makes it a microgrid, the ability to have a grid forming, the grid forming capability. And so I'm going to have Bobby kind of talk about that here in a second. But being able to make sure that we are having that connection and disconnection is kind of that key focus that we want to just kind of highlight there. So with that, I kind of want to jump into what our DERs, what our distributed energy resources, and kind of what they can do. And so Bobby, I was going to start off with you, kind of talking about the functionality of BESS systems and how the grid support features, the resiliency features, and kind of help us understand kind of what these systems are doing at a high level for us to start the conversation.
Well, obviously, one of the main purposes of putting them, if you would want a system that is a microgrid, is the ability to island. And so obviously resiliency is a very large play in that. But you can always do that many ways. And the beauty of putting in a battery energy storage system microgrid is that it doesn't do just that. If you're waiting for only when there's an emergency situation, when the grid were to go down, you're maybe not using their system very often, which it can be very, very important. There's a lot of value to resiliency, especially in certain parts of the country and the world. But you also want to be able to get that daily ROI. You want to be able to participate in a demand response program. You want to do daily peak shaving. You want to do time of use shifting of the solar array. And that's really the beauty of the battery energy storage system, is that not only is it there when you most desperately need it, when the grid is down, but it's also there to give you that daily return on your investment and can make it a super, super valuable source for almost any commercial industry.
And one thing I did fail to mention at the start of the talk is Caroline mentioned, being in front of the meter. We're kind of stretching her a little bit, making her talk about some things behind the meter. That is a big focus of what we're talking about. So commercial and industrial, C&I space, and doing these systems, behind the meter. So customer-owned facilities and how we're serving those loads. And so with that, John, I kind of wanted to have you talk a little bit about size of systems, just kind of putting that into perspective. What you were seeing at McKinstry in terms of how large are these systems, what is the capacity of the batteries, and kind of what are the loads that you're serving as well?
So we're seeing both behind the meter and front of the meter projects. We're working with utilities. We've worked with the Vista out in Spokane to install one of the ELM systems out there, a DC system. It was a pretty innovative system. We've working with PSE up in Seattle. Those systems are front of the meter. Those are close to 4 or 5 megawatts each. So they're about as large as you typically see on the distribution grid when you're putting it in a single place, in a single building or in a single location or grid place. So 5 megawatts, maybe 2 to 4 hour batteries. So each one of those could be as much as 20 megawatt hours, or kilowatt hours, whatever the size is there, but it's megawatt hours for those. But most of our batteries are not nearly that large. Most of our batteries for clients are significantly smaller. Affording batteries right now, the prices are pretty darn good, much better than they were in 2005 when I was looking for good batteries. I've been in solar for a while now. But the prices are coming down reasonably well, and they're shocking me. Every generation that we add to the battery systems, it reminds me of what happened with solar 15, almost 20 years ago now. So we're seeing commercial ones anywhere from 125 kilowatts. To be honest, that's a decent sized one right now in the commercial space, 125 kilowatts. So, we're now starting to look at 500 kilowatts and 1 megawatt ones for commercial buildings and commercial customers.
And Carolyn, so in the eyes of, kind of from the PUC and utilities perspective, again, behind the meter, can you talk to us a little bit about how the PUC specifically, sees these resources? And one of the things we talked about in the prep call is microgrids really aren't that new. We've had, and maybe you can talk a little bit about some of these generator-based microgrids that we have in place already. There's a number in Salem, and one of the questions I have is how are these energy storage, a battery microgrid, differ from, say, that generator microgrid system?
Sure. Thanks. So while we're focused on front of the meter, these new configurations are increasingly making what happens behind the meter more relevant to the utility and to the grid and the users of the grid who we serve as the regulator. For a long time, the utilities have had programs, PGE, for example, where they would arrange to call upon backup generators, diesel generators, for demand response services when they weren't being used for backup power. What we're seeing now with new technologies, or more commercial technologies, the technologies have been around for a while, is the opportunity to stack a lot more value, not just for the customer, but for the utility and the other users of the grid. So the opportunity to supply, power not just as backup power, but supply power to the grid when you're over-generating, the opportunity to provide grid services, such as voltage regulation, the opportunity to provide non-emitting electricity when we have really steep emissions reduction goals and a lot of constraints on the system that definitely require an all-of-the-above approach to meeting needs. So, and then the other thing that we see is the opportunity to provide local resilience, community resilience. I think you heard Ryan talk about extreme weather a lot earlier today, and the opportunity to use these configurations to provide resilience in a way that helps communities, especially those facing, public safety power shutoffs, facing extreme ice storms in the winter. All of that is really promising to us, especially when you can get, the allocation of costs and benefits set up in a fair and reasonable way. In terms of in front of the meter microgrids, we have a lot of work to do to set those up, and the legislature's asked us to do that. But with the behind the meter systems, we have a lot of room for improvement, I'm sure, and evolution, but those systems are in place. So we see it as something that's actionable now. And while I don't speak for the utilities, I think I was going to share a couple of observations that I have on their behalf. So I guess I will speak for the utilities a little bit. They don't like when I do that.
They're not up here.
First, what I've observed is their level of interest in partnering or being open to this kind of stuff does correlate with the amount of control they have over how those systems interact with the grid. So their ability to control dispatch, for example, is a big factor that I've noticed in how open they are to working on this kind of stuff. And then the other piece, and I think this applies to us as the regulator as well, is their level of interest usually correlates pretty high with your ability to solve one of their problems, solve a problem that they're facing on the grid. These new systems, like I said, stack a lot of different values up. And so I would just encourage folks who are exploring these things to think about, the value you're providing, the grid and the other users of the system.
Well, and that's a great segue, because I wanted to move into kind of that value stacking and what our systems can provide for the utilities specifically. So resilience is, I think, maybe an obvious one. When you have a microgrid system, you can isolate from the utility, you can have a grid forming inverter, you can run whatever loads it is that you've decided to run. And one of the big benefits is obviously the utility grid is not down all the time. It's it's a highly reliable resource, and so being able to interact with the utility, being able to do some of that frequency response, and I want to have you guys talk about this a little bit more. But on this graph, what I wanted to kind of talk about, and I'm not sure if Ryan's still in the room, but one of the things that we have is if you just kind of look at a load profile, a made-up load profile here, you see this is the load that's being pulled from some facility. And so you see peaks and valleys all over the place, and the utility, if there is no microgrid, if there's no battery storage there, the utility has to be responsive to that, and they have to provide it when it's really high, they have to provide it when it's really low, everywhere in between. And so if we could smooth that out with a energy storage system, if we have our batteries installed, I think that all the utilities would be very happy to see nice, smooth lines, step up, step down at some known intervals. It makes their lives a heck of a lot easier. And so that's one of the things I want to talk about with the value stacking and how we are able to utilize these systems a little bit more. And so one of the things, or kind of three main things here I want to look at, is just these different points on the graph where, here we're looking at some demand charge management. So we have a high usage, somebody comes in the morning, they turn on a bunch of loads. If you have that storage there, you can reduce that demand charge. So the utility doesn't have to provide it. It's a combination of batteries and utility. It makes their lives a lot easier, and we're utilizing the batteries for a much better use. We also have, in this situation of battery charging, we can use the utility to charge the battery. So middle of the night, when mentioned earlier, 1 a.m., that kilowatt hour is not worth a lot. Well, let's make it worth something. Let's utilize it in a more positive function. And then we have battery discharging on peak. And so these are ways that we can do that stacking. And then finally, and this is what I'm wanting to have the group especially get into, is this demand charge response. And so when being able to offset those demand, or the response time that the utilities are afternoons. We're all now, unfortunately, in Oregon, we're seeing a lot more air conditioners come on, and so we're seeing a lot of big heavy loads in the afternoons. And so these are some of the things, and maybe Carolyn, we can start with you just on the expanding a little bit more on those grid services and how we can utilize these systems for that.
Great. So in Oregon, we have two main investor-owned electric utilities that we regulate, and they cover about 70% of the customers in Oregon. And first we have Portland General Electric, and they tend to be experimental. They do a lot of piloting. They like to try a lot of different things. So they've introduced several things over the last, 5 to 10 years that is kind of mapping this evolution and how they see behind the meter resources as kind of a flexible resource. So there's a bunch of just straight up grant programs available that will cover upfront costs for installing storage. I think we have everything from the Energy Trust incentives that are increasingly focusing on the storage component, the flexibility component. And instead of just the solar component. But they've also been piloting several different types of demand response programs for different customer classes. A lot of those are based on, some sort of fixed fee in order to make someone's battery dispatchable. And like I mentioned earlier, the more willing a customer is, especially for the commercial products or programs they're running, the more willing you are to let the utility dispatch your battery as they need, the more compensation you receive. And then I've heard that Portland General Electric is looking for the next phase of these demand response programs that target, behind the meter resources. They're looking to start valuing more things like grid services. And then you have PacifiCorp, who tends to think of kind of a permanent program, take a little longer to think about what they want to do, and they just introduced a permanent program that they've moved over from Utah called WattSmart Battery. It's very similar. The compensation framework is rooted in your willingness to allow the utility to dispatch your battery. And then beyond that, we have net metering frameworks that you could get on time of use and do net metering, and you can extract a little bit of additional value from controlling when you use electricity on site and when you dispatch your resources to the grid.
Great, thanks for that. And so the WattSmart program is an interesting one, and maybe we'll have time to dive into that a little bit more. And this idea of this dispatchable resource, and that's something, again, going back to the engine generators, this was one actually very early in my career I got to be in the room at a hospital in Salem where they had a 5 megawatt generator. Somebody picked up a landline, this is how old it was, called up PGE up in Portland, said, go ahead and turn it on, and remotely they turned on this generator, and it was this whole dispatchable thing, and it's that same concept where PGE was taking on some of the liability of owning and maintaining those generators in exchange for being able to use that fuel kind of at a as-needed basis. So this is a very, I would say, similar situation, just different technology.
And I'll just note these are early phase programs, so I would expect a lot of evolution over time.
Absolutely, yes. We're very experimental. PGE is definitely along those lines a lot more. John, I just kind of wanted to talk about you, or have you talk about, you mentioned the pro formas and you love yourself a good spreadsheet. So, what is, talking about the ROI, the return on that investment, and a little bit about how utilities value these aspects of that, and how that comes into play when you're talking with customers and trying to get these systems funded.
Sure, it's tricky. It's an absolute challenge. We have these battery systems, which I honestly believe are remarkable. These things are Olympic athletes. They can do 10 to 20 different things, and they can do them better than almost anything we have, from backup power to frequency response, from voltage regulation to arbitrage to time of use programs, and on and on. I've seen the charts, the use case diagrams now for over 15 years, and I've been waiting for when these things are finally arriving, and I think that they kind of are. I know that they've already been here in places like California, Hawaii, New York, Texas, and some other places. It's been a little slower in the Northwest, But we're starting to see the programs now. We're starting to see PGE, Pacificor programs in Oregon. I work in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana. We're starting to see a lot of programs in Washington as well for these battery systems. So all of these use cases are nice, but that Olympic athlete, we're basically saying, here, carry this water. That's what you get to do for the next 10 years. If you don't value that use case, I plug a 0 in my pro forma for it. I can't, even though I love it and I hate to see this Olympic athlete carrying the water, I can't do anything about it if someone doesn't value that use case and pay for it. And so I think that we're starting to see it in the Northwest. We're starting to see this combination of solar's already quite economical. The battery prices are shocking me every day, not because they're going up, but because they're coming down. I'm starting to see that same similar trend that I saw in solar for almost 15, 20 years, where the prices just keep coming down. We're seeing module prices in the 20 cents range for commercial projects, for God's sakes. It's crazy. And I paid more for 200 megawatt projects a couple years ago for projects that I was developing. And I'm starting to see that same type of trend and the innovation happening with the battery system. So it does make me excited to see that. I think that we're going to see more programs that value those use cases. We've submitted into one PGE program that's pretty innovative, a CBRE program. And so we're working with the local fire station to site a couple systems, and that's when we start to see that value stacking. Now we can see the revenue streams from a capacity value, and they have capacity and, I think, frequency regulation value that they will pay for, ancillary services. But now, and when the power goes down, then we get the backup power for it. So now we have 3 things that we can stack up the value in, and to make those batteries start to actually perform what they're capable of. Not totally what they're capable of, because those same batteries can do another 5 or 6 use cases easily. And they can do them on the same site with the same battery system with the same customer. Once we get the use cases that or the utilities or someone to value those use cases that we keep talking about.
Yeah, and the more and more that these programs are rolled out, and we're starting to see them more and more so. You know, we at ELM have quite a few enrolled in the Connecticut Green Bank program. New Jersey just had a program. We have sites that will be part of the WattSmart program in Washington. And the more of these that come out, the more economical it comes, the more easier it is for you to get more of them into the ground, and makes us all happier.
Bobby, I wanted to ask you too, kind of just before we leave this graph. You know, for me, it's really easy to say, oh, let's just do some demand charge. Let's go ahead and charge it. We know when the grid is in the middle of the night, and let's do these, just add these services. As a product, that can't be necessarily easy per se. So I guess just quickly, could you tell us, you know, kind of how you're viewing that, what you are, you know, how are you handling that? Who are you communicating with? How is the control aspect of that coming in? Because that's, for us, that's always seems to be a very hard, difficult part of the entire system is the controls. And so I guess if you could just touch on that for a minute.
And the controls really are the key. It is one thing to put batteries into an enclosure and pair it with a storage inverter. That really, you know, we say at our facility all the time, that's not the hard part. The difficult part is the controller. That is the unique piece that is the differentiator. If you do not have the controls fully integrated into your battery energy storage system, it's going to make life a little more difficult for you. And so at ELM, it's more parameter settings. It is, what are we looking to do, and what are these value stacking? What is priority A? What is priority B, C, D? And we can set up the system quickly and rapidly so that we can perform every one of these functions, so that we can be a true Olympic athlete and not just hold the water for one need. We're not there just for resiliency. We are there for a multitude of cases.
Perfect, thanks. So keeping mindful of time and want to make sure that we are able to get some questions. We do have a couple other things we wanted to make sure we talked about as well. So I'm going to speed us up maybe a little bit here, but talking about microgrids interacting with the grid. And so, Caroline, I'd love to have you kind of talk. The CBRE was just thrown out there, community-based renewable energy. And so would love to just, what does that mean? What are those programs? And what are the PUC's priorities in integrating microgrids in with the utility systems?
Sure. So community-based renewable energy is maybe a term of art, but it's also kind of a catch-all that we use to talk about this transition that the state of Oregon is making and how we frame our decarbonization priorities. So we've had an RPS for a very long time, a renewable portfolio standard. But in 2021, we passed a full-on emissions reduction, a piece of emissions reduction statute that requires the utilities to work to get to zero emissions by 2040. And part of that movement was a movement to think about how we're transitioning. So it's something that you might consider like a just transition. So as we're making the investments that we need to transition the grid, we're looking out for ways to make sure that a reasonable slice of that investment pie and those benefits and the added value and the wealth accumulation is driving towards community. And so that can look like a lot of different things, and we're on the beginning stages of that journey because it also needs to be very community informed, and so that's a system we have to set up. So it means everything and nothing in particular, but one of the key pieces of implementation for that bill, it's House Bill 2021, so it's easy to remember from 2021. Was that the utilities are required in their long-term planning to quantify an amount of community-based renewable energy that is going to be cost-effectively contributing to their compliance strategy. And the utilities have taken that to heart, and I think they've done a really good job setting some ambitious targets. And their approach is really interesting too. They're kind of just doing an all call. They're saying, you bring us your ideas, we'll look for other opportunities, and it's a nice opportunity where the utilities are being really open, and that's where this, meet them with value that you can provide to them, that you can provide to community-based organizations, affordable housing, critical facilities. That's where we're at right now. It's all of the above, and just really looking to drive benefits to the people who need them the most.
Excellent. And so I wanted to also touch on, this interacting with the utilities from our perspective on the engineering side. This is not an easy feat. We have utilities, talking about the investor-owned utilities, but we also have these munis and co-ops that are out there, each one sometimes setting their own rules, telling us that they want to see things a little bit differently. So on the engineering side, and I'm sure, Bobby, you're seeing that as well on the product side, and John, when you're going to install them, it's not necessarily an easy task each time. It's not a slam dunk. It's not this is how we're going to do it every time. So that is another challenge I've seen, and that's one of the areas that I see as an area of improvement. But as for us to work on, this is a very early stage. We're very early in the development and in putting these systems in. So these are challenges that we just have, that we come across. One of the things, and I'd love to get the three of you just to kind of help as we wrap this up. How are we able to transition faster? I guess from your perspectives, what are the big impediments that you're seeing? Bobby, I'll just start with you and kind of go down the line in terms of getting these microgrids, getting the transition. How do we do it faster?
I would love to know. For one, I would love to make more sales and do so quickly. We always talk about what's the longest pole in the tent, and oftentimes it is the queue, the interconnection queue. We might have a verbal PO relatively early in the process, and then we don't see the actual PO for 6 months, a year, sometimes even longer that these projects can take. And one of the biggest things that can hold that up is that interconnection queue that would be fantastic if we could streamline that, move that along quicker so that we can move this transition to a greener technology to a more resilient, distributed technology.
Awesome. Thank you for tying the first panel into ours. That's excellent. Well done.
Well, on our end as the regulator, we're having a very human conversation about affordability in Oregon right now, and it's about the fact that there are folks who, and increasingly now under a new federal landscape, like can't pay their bills, and when you can't pay your bills, you can lose your children. You have to give up medication. So the affordability conversation is really front and center. And so if we're going to have the utilities value and use other customers' money to pay for something, or to invest in something, or to even invest in staff to make the interconnection team more robust so they can process stuff faster, it's got to be driving value to customers, and it's got to have some sort of equity-based value proposition for not just the person with the means to put the technology in. And that's just where we are right now. We're also, Ryan talked about this in the first panel as well. We're facing a wildfire liability situation in Oregon that heavily incentivizes the use of the public safety power shutoff, which is where you just, pretty conservatively shut off power because of the environment that you face as a utility. And so we also need to build out our resilience networks and we need, or frameworks. So we have new legislation for in front of the meter microgrids, but I think to get our attention as a regulator to create these value streams and to work on interconnection processes, because we have a little jurisdiction over that, but not all of it. You have to do that, and you have to be hitting these specific summer hours and these specific winter days where we're kind of facing an impending reliability crisis. So we have a lot of crises. So if you can tie your investments and your configurations and your proposals to the things that we're really, really stressing out about, then you can get our attention and we can help create the frameworks that'll move them faster.
Sorry to jump back in, but what could potentially happen as well, we've done this in California with PG Andy, is a non-wires alternative for the exact same reasons. You have these fire concerns and you have these very remote customers that the utilities have to serve. And so they have these very, very long lines that could be a fire risk. So therefore they are either shutting them down or in rare cases, there could be a fire. And so we've deployed about 10 systems in these remote northern and eastern Californian areas that are completely microgrids, disconnected from the grid. The customer still pays their standard utility to PG&E, and so they don't see anything different, but there's our system, there's a genset, and there's a solar array all on these people's land, and that very much could make sense for some of these same exact risks and concerns that utilities see.
From my point of view, to get them to move faster, pay for the use cases. That's what we need. We need to stack the revenue streams up until the projects become financially viable much easier. And the good news is it's so much easier to talk to utilities about batteries. I'm a solar guy. I've been talking to utilities for 20 years, and when they see me coming, it's like, oh, God, here comes the solar guy again. They don't want to talk about solar, but batteries are different. Batteries solve utility problems. Batteries help utilities with power quality issues. Battery can move power from a high price time to a low price, or a high peak to a low peak. Batteries are, it's lovely to talk to utilities now because I get to talk to them about something that they want and they like. And so I actually think we're going to see some pretty quick responses when the utilities start. They're already starting with these programs and paying for these use cases, and I think it's going to start happening. I think it's going to start accelerating, actually, faster than I thought it was.
Excellent. So we have just a few minutes left, so I did want to give opportunity for a question or two. So if there is somebody who has a question, would love to hear from you. Yeah, Tom.
Well, on the regulatory side, I would say that it's not the utility that's paying for it, it's the utility's other customers that are paying for it. So any program that provides system value and compensates for that value in a way that seems reasonable to ask others to pay for is going to fit into our regulatory framework. If if it's designed to give an upfront incentive and just cover the cost of installing the battery, and then that battery is used to provide grid value, that works for us. If it's, paying to dispatch, if it's paying for ancillary services or whatever, you can justify that the price that you need to be paid for it is reasonable for your neighbors to pay, then I think as a regulator, we're very open to it. I don't think we're as inclined to design a program, unless the legislature tells us to design a program specifically so it pencils for the person who's, the DER owner.
I think it's just another remarkable way to use batteries. It's crazy how many different things you can figure out like that. It's remarkable. I honestly believe they're going to change the way we use power. I think that 20 years ago, if you would have asked me, are you going to put a hard phone line in your house? I'm like, of course. What are you, an idiot? I need phone. I'm building the retirement home. Guess what's not going in that home? There will not have a phone line there. I don't need one anymore. And I think there's a time coming when the power line might be similar to the phone line. And you're going to have a lot more of these battery-operated microgrids out there than you think are coming. I think they are coming, and I think that there's going to be a whole lot of them. I think there's going to be utilities that form and optimize around that, and they're able to give services to those entities. But I think that similar action is coming for microgrids.
Okay, we can do it real quick if you.
Super quick.
Yep.
Okay, I haven't heard anyone have any thoughts about that.
I think V2G is going to be huge in certain avenues. In particular, I think school buses would be incredibly valuable because when do you generally need them on the grid? When do you need the most grid services? It's generally during the summers. When are school buses not running? Not during the summer. So you have this generating source, this energy just sitting there. And you could very easily have school buses be electrified and use that energy in multiple ways. And then again, it gives you a fantastic ROI to these ISDs that are strapped for cash. They usually don't have it. And so sometimes that's the hesitancy to maybe electrify your fleet for a school. But if you're able to use it and pay for it and some and make it into a revenue service after just a few years, it's a no-brainer then.
And I'll close with this, but V2G, vehicle to grid, it's coming. We'll see it, and it will play a big part of it. One of our challenges there is we have an automotive industry that is basically self-regulated. We have a utility industry that has folks like the PUC regulating it. Those two are not looking to talk to each other very easily, or they are there's a lot of conflict there. There's a lot of friction. So yes, it's coming. Will it be easy? Probably no. Will we get there? Absolutely. So thank you all very much.